Hello, class. So today we're going to learn about informative speeches and just get some pointers and tips on how to prepare a speech that's intended to inform, especially if for those of you who will be doing so in your final speeches. Informative speaking is the basis of all prepared speeches. If you're not good at informative, it's really hard to be good at persuasive speaking. So informative is basically the foundation by which any kind of other speaking is built upon. And with persuasive speaking especially, there's always going to be some informing that has to go on, but not all informing requires some persuading, at least in the sense of issuing a call to action. So informative speaking in general is speaking for the purpose of educating an audience about a topic. So the key word with informative is educating. Okay? So when you're informing, you're educating us about a topic. Now, informative speeches can have a persuasive effect. So that's why in the previous lectures I've talked about speeches having different effects, and they can have multiple effects. So a speech can be entertaining and persuasive at the same time. Similarly, an informative speech can sometimes be persuasive on accident. So imagine doing an informative on chocolate cake, for example. So if you do an informative on chocolate cake, you're probably going to make some people hungry for chocolate cake by the end of it. So a really good clincher then for an informative on chocolate cake would be to bring some chocolate cake in and share it with the class or with your audience. And on the other hand, though, we can think of some very mundane topics like the evolution of staplers or how cars work, which don't really have a clear call to action. And so if you inform people about staplers, it may not necessarily make them want to own a stapler or do anything with them. It's just like, oh, a nice to know type thing. So a big difference between informative and persuasive speaking is persuasive speaking has a clear call to action. Informative doesn't usually. Usually informative is just to educate you and to let you know about something. Now, there are two kinds of informative speeches. The first kind you have is descriptions. And these informative speeches describe the nature, inner workings, or history of something. So most informative speeches, and I expect that your informative speeches should probably fall under this category. So in this kind of speaking, you're describing something. So you're talking about the history of cars, or you're talking about talking about some hero, or informing people about the trends that are changing in the United States, things like that. Demonstrations are the other kind of informative speech. And so in demonstrations, what you're doing is you're demonstrating how to do something, or you're demonstrating how it works. And this is often a hands-on type performance where you actually bring in that thing that you're demonstrating, or you show people how it's actually being done as you do it. So with demonstrations, for example, like if you want to do a product demonstration of how a new invention works, you would bring it into the classroom and you would show people how it works. Or I had one student who demonstrated how to make really good brownies, and so she brought in all of the ingredients and she showed people how to make brownies. Now, I'm going to ask that you probably stick to descriptions, because doing demonstrations requires a little bit more than just doing the activity. So when the student who did the brownie making speech came in, she had a lot of pauses in it because we just basically watched her make a brownie. If you're going to do a demonstration speech, you got to keep talking. So what you have to think of it as being on a show. So like think of the Food Network when there's a celebrity chef, like, Barefoot Contessa or whoever, or Emerald. Usually it's not quiet. It's not a quiet show. Usually Emerald is like, today I'm going to be making soup. Now the kind of soup I'm going to be making is tomato basil soup. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to make the stock. So there's different kinds of stock that you can make. And while he's doing this, he's making the stock. And he's like, there's 3 different kinds of stock. There's vegetable stock, chicken stock, whatever. Now, as I'm, making the stock here, I'm taking it out of a can and I'm pouring it. So you notice how he's providing commentary and, I'm stirring it. Now make sure when you're stirring it that you have really good motion going and, you add enough ingredients. And so basically what they're doing is they're providing commentary to what they're doing. So it's not just, okay, now I'm taking stock. Then you have like this long pause. Okay, now I'm adding basil. Now I'm adding garlic. You see what I mean? Like you have to keep it conversational. So if you're going to do a demonstration, that's what you want to be thinking of. But for the final speech, I would stick to descriptions only. Okay, so there are different types of topics you can do an informative speech on. And so I'm just going to kind of write down some of the big ones. So of course you can do objects. You can do an informative on any kind of object, you can do it on like credit cards, you can do it on planets. I mean, you can do any kind of object that interests you or that you feel passionate about. It certainly can be an informative. You can do it on people or groups. Maybe you'll do your informative on some unknown celebrity that maybe a lot of people don't know about. Or maybe a band. Maybe you have a really cool band that you really like that you want to just do an informative on. Or Taylor Swift or whoever. You can do it on a demographic. So maybe the increasing Italian population that's growing in the South. Or you can do it on refugees. I mean, you can do it on all kinds of things. You can do an informative on some kind of event. So maybe there's some historical event that took place. Maybe you want to do it on the moon landing. Maybe you want to do it on Rockfest, the history of Rockfest. Or you can do it on any kind of local event as well. So maybe there's this really cool event that takes place in Jonesboro every year that nobody knows about. Do your informative on that and maybe the history of the event, how the event has evolved, and when is the next event going to be, and what can we do to participate in it. You can do it on a process. How to change a tire, how your concretes are made at Shakes Frozen Custard if you work there. So explain how something comes into process or how something comes into fruition that maybe that's interesting to us. Or you can just do it on an idea. Murphy's Law, and I've heard different variations of it, like if something can go wrong, it will go wrong. I've also heard the variation of the thing that you least expect to happen will happen. So I don't know. Whatever Murphy's Law is, you can do an informative on that. Different views on liberty. So maybe you'll talk about the founding fathers and their views of what liberty meant. So some kind of abstract idea or materialism or nihilism. Somebody did an informative on nihilism. So the whole idea of, the world's coming to the end anyways, everything's going to die, anyways, so might as well just chill, that kind of thing. So you can do your informative on an idea. Now, let's look at the 5-paragraph format and see how doing an informative affects that. So remember the 5-paragraph format that we went through in one of the previous lectures. You have your intro, and then you have your 3 main points. You have your 3 main points. So I'll just put MP1, MP2, MP3, not downloaded, and conclusion. Okay. So of course in the intro there's some things that you want to make sure you do just as standard fare. And first thing is, of course, you want to, get your attention getter. So we know how to do these now. And then, of course, you want to introduce your topic, So I should know very quickly in your intro section what your informative is about. If you're finished the intro and I still don't know what you're informing on, that's a problem. Now, third thing, you definitely want to have motivation. So here's the thing with informative. You really want to pick things that you know will interest your audience. But of course, you want to be true to yourself too. And so you kind of have to find a balance there. So if you don't think your informative is patently obvious in terms of its utility or interest or ability to capture the audience's interest, you might have to spend a little bit of time motivating them to be interested. So, for example, if you're going to do your informative on beetles, okay, the bugs, your audience may not have a natural interest in beetles if you're just speaking to a public speaking class, but if you're at like the National Association of Entomology, where that's where they study bugs, they might already have a natural interest in the topic. But if you're just talking to mom and dad, why do I care about beetles? Oh, well, the reason you want to be interested in beetles is because beetles are important to the ecosystem. And if we don't understand how they work, one day we'll go extinct. I mean, whatever the motivation is, you got to make sure you have that informative. You got to be able to answer the question, why should I listen to this when there's all kinds of other people out there trying to inform me of other things? So motivation is a big part. Now, there's usually 3 different ways to motivate people. And so I'm going to break this down a little bit more. So, one kind of motivation is practicality. And with practicality, you're arguing that the information will be useful for practical reasons. So, if, for example, you're doing your informative on how to change a tire, a great motivation would be, it's good to know how to change a tire because one day you might be stuck on the side of the road. And if you don't know how to change your tire, that's going to lead to problems and very expensive car bills, right? Towing bills, whatever. So practicality basically says you should listen to my speech because you could actually use this information in practice. A second one is awareness. And these aren't mutually exclusive, so you can have all 3 if you want. But you want to try to at least use one if you're going to do an informative. And awareness is where the information will expand your awareness about something so you can act accordingly. So let's say I was doing my informative on the flu virus, okay? Like a new strand of flu virus, like H1N1, but like even worse, okay? The awareness argument will be something like, it's important for us to learn about this new flu virus because then we can be aware, we can learn how to avoid it, or we can learn how to make sure we can be aware that this is going on so we can cover our mouths when we cough next time. Something like that. So awareness is basically saying, it's good for you to know this information because that awareness can help you in the future to avoid something or not do something. Lastly, we have appreciation. Appreciation is where you argue that the information will expand your appreciation of something and maximize its enjoyment. So if I was doing my informative on the evolution of jazz, I might say something like, and it's good to learn about the evolution of jazz because as we learn where it comes from, how it's evolved, and where its future is, we can then understand and enjoy the real beauty behind the music or whatever. You make some argument that like, by learning about this, we can enjoy it more. And you want to be specific in terms of how that's going to be so. But you want to basically motivate us by saying, look, it's going to maximize your pleasure or enjoyment more. Not to sound like a birth control commercial, but Okay, that's that. So informative is selling in that sense then. So don't assume that your audience is always going to be motivated. You have to think of informative as kind of being persuasive in the sense is you have to sell the importance of what you're talking about. You have to convince people this is worth listening to. I know there's a lot of other things that are informative. There's cat videos on YouTube. There's things on Facebook that people post. But dang it, this speech is more informative and more interesting than what you could be doing right now. Okay. Then, of course, you want to make sure you preview your points. So we're still in intro here. Preview your points. And I think you guys know how to do that. We'll see with your weekly videos in terms of how well you've understood this, but preview your main points. Now, speaking of the main points. So you've done all that in the intro. Your main points, just do what we've learned in basic speech writing. So decide an order. Often the informative topic will suggest an order to you. So like if you're doing the history of something, temporal order is good, starting with the beginning, middle, and end of something. If you're going to be doing something that's just kind of random facts, you can do categorical order. So the topic will suggest a logical flow that you want to make sure you incorporate into the building of your main points. And then lastly, with the conclusion, just like we've learned before, transition into it, and then summarize. So summarize those main points, just the themes of your main points, the takeaway, and clinch. Okay? And that's pretty much it with informative. So the key to informative is making sure that you're educating the audience and you're keeping it interesting. Don't forget captivators in between speeches or in between main points. So keep the captivators coming. You should start each main point with a transition and a captivator, so don't forget about those. So, transition, these are all T's, and then have a transition plus a captivator incorporated. So transition plus captivator, these between those 2 points, then transition to your conclusion, and you should be good to go. Okay? So that's pretty much with informative, and just remember, you are selling. So if you don't sound interested in the topic, it's not going to be interesting to the audience. So everything starts with you in public speaking. So if you sound boring, they're going to be bored. If you sound excited, they're going to be excited. So voice diction, that vocal variety drill, all of that comes into play here. Okay? So if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, good luck with informative.